The soft hum of the workshop seemed distant in the quiet confines of the locker room. Maelorion stood tall, peeling away the tactical uniform piece by piece. His movements were methodical, each gesture imbued with a quiet grace that seemed almost out of place amidst the utilitarian surroundings. The tactical gear, foreign to his ancient sensibilities, felt like a costume he had briefly donned for a performance on an unfamiliar stage. Nearby, a bench held the neatly folded robes of his station, their silvery threads shimmering faintly, even in the dim light. The stark contrast between the sleek, dark tactical gear and the ethereal elegance of the robes was not lost on him. As he fastened the intricate clasps of his robe, the door creaked open. Aeliana stepped inside, her own movements as fluid as the light catching on the runes of her garments. She closed the door softly behind her, leaning against it for a moment before speaking. "You handled yourself well today," she said, her voice low but warm. "It's not every day a guardian finds himself in the field again." Maelorion glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "It has been centuries," he admitted. "Much has changed." Aeliana stepped closer, folding her hands loosely in front of her. "It's not easy, I know. Returning to action after so long, seeing how the world has evolved." Maelorion exhaled quietly, adjusting the folds of his robe. "Action was once my life, Aeliana, but the weight of leadership draws one away from the field. It demands decisions made in chambers, not on battlefields." "You've still kept your edge," Aeliana observed with a faint smile. A rare flicker of amusement crossed Maelorion's face. "The field does not forget its own, nor do I forget what it means to lead where others follow." Aeliana nodded, her gaze steady. "And what do you think of them? The pack?" Maelorion paused, considering his words carefully. "They are unconventional, rough around the edges. Their methods lack the precision of elven tradition." Aeliana's brow furrowed slightly, but she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "But," Maelorion added, his tone softening, "there is strength in their imperfection. Each member brings a unique skill, a piece of themselves, to the whole. They move not as one, but as many threads woven into the same tapestry. It is effective." Aeliana's smile widened, though she kept her voice measured. "They've earned that unity through trials you and I can only imagine. The mortal realm is chaotic." Maelorion nodded slowly. "Chaos, yes, but within it, there is purpose. I see now why you chose to aid them." As Maelorion adjusted the last clasp of his robe, he turned to Aeliana fully, his gaze piercing but not unkind. "And what of you, Aeliana? You have walked alongside them, seen their strengths and their flaws up close. Do you feel your actions have tipped the balance?" Aeliana's expression grew serious. "Perhaps, but sometimes balance is found in action, not stillness. I couldn't watch them fight these battles alone." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Maelorion placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, his voice carrying the weight of his centuries of wisdom. "You are right to act, even if the path is uncertain. But tread carefully, Aeliana. The burden of a guardian is not easily shared." The door creaked open again, and the distant hum of the workshop grew louder. Maelorion stepped into the hall, his robes trailing behind him like a silver current. Aeliana followed, her presence a steadying force as they moved toward the main floor. The pack would be waiting, scattered across the sprawling facility. Maelorion had seen their faces and their work, but now he would see their hearts. Maelorion stepped out of the locker room, his robes trailing behind him like a whisper of another world. His gaze swept over the vast workshop, as if seeing it for the first time. The noise, the movement, the hum of life and purpose. It was all so foreign and yet captivating. Aeliana walked at his side, her presence steady and calming. "You wanted to see what they do," she said softly. "Now's your chance." Maelorion nodded. "Show me the heart of this pack." The rhythmic clink of metal on metal drew Maelorion to the armory, where Gunnar stood cleaning Starbreaker. Alpha lounged nearby, his massive form exuding both menace and calm. As Maelorion entered, Alpha's ears perked, his sharp blue eyes locking on the Guardian. Gunnar didn't look up, focused on his work. "You need something, or are you just here to gawk at the rifle?" Maelorion stepped closer, studying the weapon. Starbreaker. It carries the weight of magic and mortal innovation. Gunnar finally glanced up, his single blue eye meeting Maelorion's unflinching gaze. "It carries the weight of every fight I've ever been in, every choice I've had to make." Maelorion inclined his head slightly. "A burden you bear well." Gunnar snorted, returning to his work. "You don't get a choice, not in this line of work. You carry it, or someone else gets crushed under it." Alpha let out a low chuff, and Maelorion turned his gaze to the wolf. "Your bond with him, it is rare." "Alpha's more than a partner," Gunnar said, his tone softening slightly. "He's part of the pack, just like the rest of us." Maelorion watched them for a moment longer, then nodded. "You lead well, Gunnar, even if your methods are unconventional." Gunnar smirked. "Unconventional works. Ask anyone here." The sound of music and faint laughter guided Maelorion to the garage. Derren was there tinkering with the robotic pack mule. He glanced up as Maelorion approached, his grin widening. "Well, if it isn't the high and mighty Guardian." "Come to bless my little mule," Derren said, gesturing dramatically to the robot. Maelorion raised an eyebrow. "This contraption, it carries your supplies?" "Among other things," Derren said, patting the mule affectionately. "It's reliable, doesn't eat, and doesn't complain. Pretty much the opposite of me." Maelorion regarded him silently for a moment. "Your humour masks a keen mind, a curious defence." Derren shrugged, his grin never fading. "Keeps me sane. Plus, it's fun to watch people squirm when they don't know if I'm serious." The mule beeped softly, and Maelorion tilted his head. "It speaks?" "Sort of," Derren said, smirking. "It's more polite than me, though, so don't get used to it." Maelorion's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Your levity is unique, but effective." "Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment," Derren said, tipping an imaginary hat. In the open courtyard, Clara was training with Omega, the young wolf moving in perfect harmony with her. She switched seamlessly between her P90 and Staff of Light, her movements precise and fluid. Maelorion watched for a moment before stepping closer. "You wield both weapons with skill. Few mortals could manage such a balance." Clara paused, catching her breath. "Balance is the key. Alfheim taught me that." "And the pack?" "They taught me purpose," she said simply. Maelorion studied her for a long moment. "You carry the weight of two worlds. It is not an easy burden." Clara smiled faintly. "No, but it's one worth carrying." Omega let out a low bark, and Maelorion glanced at the wolf. "Your bond is strong." Clara knelt beside Omega, ruffling his fur. "He's my partner, my family." Maelorion nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Family, a rare strength." The hum of runes greeted Maelorion as he entered the portal room. Karina and Shade were inspecting the intricate symbols, their conversation low but intense. Karina noticed him first and straightened, her violet eyes steady. "Guardian," she said respectfully. Maelorion inclined his head. "Caelithra, you stand between worlds, a queen in exile." Karina's jaw tightened. "I stand where I'm needed. Titles don't matter right now." "Perhaps," Maelorion said, his gaze shifting to Shade. "And you?" Your loyalty is unwavering. Shade nodded solemnly. It's more than loyalty, it's trust. Karina glanced at Shade, her expression softening. He's saved my life more times than I can count. That's not loyalty, that's family. Maelorion's expression softened. Then may your bond guide you through the trials to come. In the quiet of the medical bay, Jewel worked diligently, monitoring the detainee's condition. Maelorion entered silently, observing her careful movements. You heal what others would deem broken, he said. Jewel glanced up, her hands never stopping. Someone has to. Magic or not, everyone deserves a chance. Your patience is admirable, Maelorion said, but it must be difficult. It is, Jewel admitted, but giving up isn't an option. Maelorion nodded, his gaze lingering on the detainee. Your strength lies not in your weapons, but in your will. That is rare. Jewel gave him a faint smile. Thanks. I'll take that as a compliment. Finally, Maelorion reached the tech lab, where Eli was surrounded by glowing runes and intricate circuitry. She didn't look up immediately, engrossed in her work. You blend two worlds that were never meant to meet, he said. Eli glanced up, smirking. That's the fun part. Maelorion stepped closer, his gaze taking in the complexity of her work. Do you not fear what you create? Fear? Eli said, raising an eyebrow. Nah, respect maybe, but fear? That's how you mess up. Maelorion nodded slowly. A dangerous mindset, but one that suits you. Eli grinned. Danger's half the fun. As Maelorion returned to Aeliana's side, he exhaled quietly. They are unconventional, but there is strength in their unity. Perhaps there is more to these mortals than meets the eye. Aeliana smiled faintly. I told you. They're worth it. Maelorion nodded, his gaze thoughtful. Perhaps they are. The workshop hummed with quiet activity as the morning sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow on the tech lab. Eli was absent, her tools neatly arranged on her workbench, a rare occurrence in the otherwise bustling space. Maelorion wandered in, his hands clasped behind his back, taking in the intricate mix of technology and magic that defined Eli's workspace. His gaze lingered on the two eggs nestled in a reinforced rune-covered cradle at the far end of the bench. They were smooth and faintly luminous, their surfaces etched with ancient, intricate runes that pulsed with faint, rhythmic light. He stepped closer, drawn to their quiet power. The air around them seemed charged, resonating with a frequency he could feel in his very bones. Curious, aren't they? Aeliana's voice came from the doorway, soft and knowing. She stepped into the lab, her robes trailing behind her like whispers of the past. Maelorion turned to her, his expression contemplative. These artifacts, they are no mere curiosities. Their magic is ancient and profound, almost alive. Aeliana moved beside him, her gaze falling on the eggs with a mixture of reverence and caution. They're not artifacts, Maelorion. They are remnants of a world lost to darkness, the last hope of a realm that has all but faded from memory. Maelorion's brows furrowed, his voice low but insistent. Explain. Aeliana sighed, brushing her fingers lightly over the runes etched into the eggs. They are tied to Nythoria, Karina's home. When the darkness overtook her realm, her parents sent her to Earth, hidden and protected, with these. They entrusted them to her? Maelorion asked, his tone edged with disbelief. Aeliana nodded. She was too young to understand their significance. Even now, I suspect she doesn't fully grasp what they mean. But these eggs are more than symbols of her lineage. They hold potential, perhaps even life. Maelorion's gaze sharpened. Life? What manner of life? That, Aeliana admitted, is something even I cannot say for certain. They pulse with Nythoria's unique magic, but their secrets remain locked. Eli has been studying them, but progress has been slow. The senior guardian turned back to the eggs, his expression a mixture of awe and caution. If what you say is true, these are not merely relics. They are catalysts. Their power could shift the balance of realms. Aeliana met his gaze, her own eyes filled with conviction. Which is why they remain here, under Eli's care and Gunnar's protection. The pack is her family, and their strength keeps her grounded. If the time comes for these eggs to fulfill their purpose, it will be with her, and the pack standing beside her. Maelorion's expression softened, though his voice remained grave. The council would see these as a threat. They might, Aeliana conceded, but they're not for the council to decide upon. They belong to Karina, to her journey, and she is not yet ready to face what they represent. Maelorion reached out, his fingers hovering over the eggs without touching them. And if they awaken before she is ready, Aeliana's lips pressed into a thin line, then we will stand with her, all of us. The room fell into a heavy silence, the faint pulsing of the eggs filling the space like a heartbeat. Finally, Maelorion withdrew his hand, his expression unreadable. Eli is a capable steward, he said, his tone measured. But the burden of such power, it should not fall upon one so young. Aeliana smiled faintly. She is young, yes, but she's also resilient. Like the pack, she's unconventional, but effective. Maelorion allowed himself a small nod. Perhaps unconventionality is what the realms need. As they left the tech lab, the eggs continued their quiet vigil, their faint light casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward an uncertain future. Derren leaned back in his chair, boots propped up on the edge of the work table as Eli tinkered with a glowing device that hummed faintly with power. The workshop was calm for once, the soft sounds of tools and quiet murmurs filling the air. It was rare downtime, and Derren was making the most of it, cracking jokes at Eli's expense while she ignored him with the focus of someone accustomed to his antics. His phone buzzed on the table. The name flashing across the screen made him grin. "Rose," he said, his tone thick with amusement. He let it ring twice before swiping to answer and putting it on speaker. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Your little kingdom fall apart already." Eli glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "This should be good." Rose's voice came through the speaker, smooth and sharp. "Derren, darling, we need to talk." Derren stretched, feigning boredom. "Do we? Because I was just sitting here thinking how peaceful my life's been lately." "Cut the theatrics!" Rose snapped, her tone clipped. "It's about Ravina." At that, Eli froze, her fingers pausing mid-adjustment. Derren's grin widened as he leaned forward, bracing his elbows on the table. "Ah, Ravina," he drawled. "Chaos incarnate. Sounds like a you problem." "Don't be obtuse," Rose bit back, her irritation crackling through the phone. "I'm offering information." "Are you?" Derren said lightly. "And here I thought you were just looking for an excuse to hear my voice." "Derren." "Sorry, can't hear you over all the grovelling," he interrupted. Then, with a dramatic sigh, he added, "Look, Rose, I'd love to chat, but I'm busy. Tell Ravina I said hi." And with that, he hung up. Eli let out a short laugh. "You're playing with fire!" Derren grinned, leaning back in his chair again. "She loves it." The phone rang again less than a minute later. Derren picked it up with a flourish, answering as though nothing had happened. "Rose, you called back. I knew you couldn't quit me." "You're impossible," Rose hissed. "Fine. Neutral ground. You pick the place." Derren tapped his chin, dragging out his response just long enough to feel her temper flare through the silence. "There's a park on the edge of town," he said finally. "Big fountain, lots of benches, plenty of witnesses. You know the one." "Fine," she said curtly. "Half an hour." "See you there, Your Majesty," he said, hanging up before she could reply. He turned to Eli, a wicked grin on his face. "Well, that was fun." Eli shook her head, smirking. "If she doesn't kill you one day, it'll be a miracle." The park was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the paths. Derren arrived first, leaning casually against a bench near the central fountain. Thunderstrike rested against his shoulder, a deliberate choice. He'd seen how Rose's eyes flicked to it whenever he carried it, her disdain for his straightforward approach to power evident in every sneer. Today, he wanted her to notice. She arrived 10 minutes later, gliding across the park like she owned it. She was dressed in sleek black, her coat swishing around her legs as she walked. Her sharp eyes swept the area, cataloguing every detail before landing on Derren. She approached with a smirk that didn't reach her eyes, her posture stiff despite her usual grace. "You came armed," she said as she reached him, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Should I be flattered or insulted?" "Take your pick," Derren replied, grinning as he straightened up. "Figured I'd play it safe. You're unpredictable. Half the charm, half the danger." Rose rolled her eyes but didn't respond, gesturing to the bench. They sat, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. Derren didn't waste time. "All right, Rose," he said, his tone losing its usual edge of humour. "No games. You called me, so let's hear it." Rose arched an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by his directness. "Straight to the point? That's new." "Don't get used to it," he said, leaning forward. "Now talk to me. What's got you so wound up?" Her smirk faltered, her eyes flicking to the fountain. For a moment she said nothing, her fingers absently brushing the bracelet on her wrist. "It's Ravina," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "She's testing boundaries. Yours, mine, everyone's. She's after something bigger, and I don't know what it is." "That's what's got you rattled?" Derren asked, tilting his head. "Not knowing?" Rose's gaze snapped back to him, sharp as a blade. "You don't get it. She's chaos personified. She doesn't just fight, she dismantles. She's dangerous." "And so are you," Derren said simply. "So why call me? What do you really want?" Rose hesitated, her mask slipping just enough for Derren to see the doubt beneath. He leaned back, crossing his arms as he studied her. "You don't have to handle this alone, you know," he said, his tone softer than she expected. "You've got people. Hell, you've got me if you need it." She laughed, but it lacked her usual bite. "You think I'm just going to trust you? Hand over everything I've built so you can play the hero?" "No," Derren said, meeting her gaze. "But I think you could use an ally who doesn't want to stab you in the back the second you turn around." The silence between them was heavy, but something shifted. Rose looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of her bracelet. "You're annoyingly persistent," she muttered. "It's one of my better qualities," he replied, grinning. Rose shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Fine. No games, as you said. I'll tell you what I know about Ravina. But after this, we're even. Got it?" "Deal," Derren said, leaning forward. "So start talking." Derren leaned back on the bench, watching Rose carefully as she collected her thoughts. The tension between them had eased slightly, but the weight of the moment was palpable. He could see the flicker of hesitation in her dark eyes, a rare crack in the armor she wore so effortlessly. Whatever Rose was about to say, it wasn't going to be trivial. Finally, she exhaled and began. "Ravina isn't just chaos for the sake of chaos, Derren. She's a demigod, Loki's daughter." Derren's eyebrows shot up, and he let out a low whistle. "Well, that explains the flair for the dramatic." Rose ignored his quip, her voice sharp. "She visited the bar before the fight with your pack, walked in like she owned the place, and trust me, she didn't come for the ambiance." "What did she want?" Derren asked, leaning forward. Rose's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze drifting past him as if recalling the encounter. "She wanted me to fall in line, to acknowledge her as the new power in play. She said the drug, whatever's in it, is her way of leveling the playing field, of controlling those who can't resist its effects." "And you told her to shove it, right?" Derren said, his tone light but his expression serious. Rose smirked, though it lacked its usual bite. "Of course I did." But she wasn't asking Derren. She was testing me, testing how far she could push before I'd break. Derren's eyes narrowed. And how did that go? She didn't break me, Rose said firmly, but she left her mark. She touched the bracelet on her wrist, the motion almost absent-minded. She knows about this, about what it does. Called it a leash. Derren frowned, his voice quieter now. And how do you feel about that? Rose's eyes flashed, her defiance returning. How do you think I feel? She wants to tear down everything I've built, make me a pawn in her game. But I'm not rolling over, Derren. Not for her, not for anyone. Derren nodded slowly, processing her words. So she's a demigod with a chip on her shoulder and a taste for power. Why the drug? What's it doing to people? Rose's expression darkened. It's more than just a high. It amplifies strength, sure, but it also warps the mind, makes people more malleable. She's building an army, Derren. And she's starting with the weak and the desperate, the ones who think they have nothing to lose. Derren's jaw tightened, and then she points them at people like us. Exactly, Rose said. She's not just testing the pack, she's testing me, testing the limits of the Shadow Realm, seeing how far she can push before someone pushes back. Derren leaned back again, letting out a slow breath. And what's your play, Rose? You've got to have one. Rose's smirk returned, sharper now. My play is to survive. But if I'm being honest, Derren, I don't think I can do it alone. Derren studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. You won't have to. But let's get one thing straight. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because Ravina needs to be stopped. Of course, Rose said smoothly, though there was a flicker of relief in her eyes. And I'll help where I can. But I don't answer to you, Derren. Let's not get that twisted. Derren grinned, standing up and slinging Thunderstrike over his shoulder. Wouldn't dream of it, Your Majesty. But you'd better be ready to share everything you've got. No more games. Rose rose gracefully to her feet, her smirk firmly in place. I'll play nice, Derren. For now. As they parted ways, Derren couldn't shake the feeling that this uneasy truce was only the beginning. Ravina's shadow loomed large, and whatever game she was playing, the stakes were higher than ever.
All right, you've made it this far. That means either you like what you're seeing, or you're lost. Either way, no harm in sticking around, right? Go on, hit that subscribe button, join the team, and while you're at it, hit like, because, let's be honest, you're already invested. And the bell? That's for you if you don't want to miss any of the action. You wouldn't want me to come find you. See you soon, and remember, once you're in, you're family.